Well, thank you for the previous two presentations, and it is also a bit of an honor to present this from the Netherlands to the DACH-Bereich. And I'm going to give you a very honest look at the digital autonomy and open source in the Netherlands, and it is. I don't know. So a little bit about myself, not too much, but I've been working in the Dutch government or with the Dutch government. I've been a Dutch government regulator, and I have built a lot of software that is being used around the world and also in Germany. And this combination has allowed me to sort of speak to the government, but also know what I am talking about. And that is rather helpful. And I've been making noises about autonomy for the past 5 years. And this actually started with the 5G discussion, which was also very active in Germany. Should we let the Chinese manage our 5G? And we thought that that was a new discussion, whereas the Chinese were already running our 4G. And the discussion we are having now is actually the same sort of digital autonomy discussion, but now a lot bigger. For some reason, I'm a lot on TV these days because people want me to explain this stuff. And that's not only nice for me, but this has helped me make this a sort of political point for the Dutch government. And so I get invited to a lot of stuff for some reason, and people read the papers I write. But they also invite me to talk about what are our plans, are the plans good? So, and I hope to share that with you a little bit here. So, open source and digital autonomy in the Netherlands, the good, the bad, and the very ugly. And we start with this. We just love Microsoft here. In fact, I think the Dutch government and Dutch society loves Microsoft more than the American government does. And this is not new. This is something that's been going on for like 30 years. And the dominance is total. And that means also that it's very difficult to even have a good conversation about this, because there are many people that have never heard of anything other than Microsoft. And it's not easy to talk to people like that. And you see this in our senior government stuff. At one point, the minister in charge of digitalization, the chief information officer, the chief cloud architect, and from the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the chief cloud person, all came from Google or Microsoft. And I'm not saying that these people are corrupt. That is not what I'm saying. But I am saying that they have a certain way of thinking. And the thinking in the Netherlands really is Microsoft and big tech. Now, this is some statistics. Microsoft 365, where you host all your email and documents on American servers. And 100% of our local government is on Microsoft 365. At one point, we thought it was 99.7%, but there was a measurement error. It's actually 100%. And the upper house of parliament, lower house of parliament, competition authority, the financial markets authority, most of the Dutch central bank are all already completely 100% on the Microsoft cloud, and they will never be able to go back because they no longer know how. And in the coming 2 weeks, we are going to hear if our entire tax agency is going to migrate to Microsoft 365. And you have to realize that unlike in Germany, our tax system is completely integrated. So if you know someone's citizen number, all the tax things are synchronized. The health records are synchronized. Your ownership, your bank statements are synchronized. And these people are about to move to Microsoft entirely. And then you should know around the 14th of October this year, you have to make a choice. Are you going to spend a lot more money in order to continue using your email on Microsoft Exchange? Or are you going to spend a lot less money and migrate all your email to the Microsoft 365 cloud, which is a strange situation. But not all Dutch ministries have yet made up their mind. But it's entirely possible that our entire police system and the courts, the national courts and the local courts and some ministries will also move to Microsoft 365. There's a little bit of good news. A year ago, the Dutch National Audit Board found that the entire Dutch government would move to Microsoft 365. And that was the plan. And since making a lot of noise over this the past year, and since Donald Trump got elected, and since the International Criminal Court thing happened, we now have that most government ministries are actually likely going to stay on their own exchange servers. And this is a very good result, and it shows the power of making a noise about this. Because if you compare it to other countries, for example, in Belgium, for some reason in Belgium it is all fine and no one is worried about it. And in the Netherlands, if a few people had not made noise, this would also not have been an item. So we now celebrate it as a success that people keep using Microsoft, but now their own Microsoft server. But we are incredibly dependent on Microsoft. And I think this is an important point. And I think this also goes for Germany and Austria and Switzerland. How did this happen? Why is it possible that these politicians make such terrible choices? And I think this goes for all four of our countries here. The people that make the decisions, the people that make policy, the senior management, they are not technical people. And not only are they not technical people, I used to think we could educate these people because they would want to know more about technical stuff. And one recent conclusion has been that ministers and senior policymakers, they actually do not like technology. They really do not want to talk about it. They want someone else to solve this for them. And they treat it a bit like the plumbing and the sewer. They're like, well, someone else should take care of my email and I don't want to think about this. And it should happen out of my sight, and we should get some techniker on that to solve this for us. But it is not a strategic choice. And I think that this is how we got where we are today. And also, if we want to improve things, we have to realize that our improvements go through these people that would rather talk about disease or migration or death rather than talk about their cloud dependencies. So now, after all this terrible news, some good news. Actually, in the Netherlands, we are not afraid of open source. So we do not have people saying that there are laws that say that you cannot do open source things. And actually, like Austria and Switzerland, we have laws that say that the government actually must publish as open source and must use open source unless there is no alternative. And so, for example, the Dutch Weather Agency has a very good app that almost everyone uses, and it is fully open source. And the national system for logging into the government, called Digitale, is also completely open source. And if you want to report that the traffic light is broken or a street light doesn't work, around 30% of all Dutch people can report that using the Signalen app, which is also open source. And finally, the thing that I also work for a little bit, the electoral board, all our election software is open source. We currently use the German election software, which is not open source, but is at least source available. But the next generation of our election software is completely open source, and even we respond to pull requests. So there have even been already contributions by citizens, and we've had citizens test our software, which is extremely nice. We also have the Haven standard, which is a way of deploying your stuff on a variety of clouds. So it's a standard, and this standard is supported by Azure and in Google, and it's rather good. And we have a thing called DigiLab, and DigiLab, for example, works with Zendis and La Poste and other stuff to create digital working environments for the government. So we have a lot of sort of interesting initiatives from the government going. And we also have a very good civil society. So there are lots of places in the Netherlands that foster digital autonomy, care about that stuff, talk about it, fund it even. And we also have a few open source players that are pretty large. So for example, if you use any kind of DNS server around the world, it is very likely that it comes from the Netherlands or the Czech Republic. And actually this is a field where Europe dominates. So there's a lot of activity here and a lot of support, and we really, it's not that we hate open source. It is just, the problem is we love the open source bits as long as we don't have to use it. And this is an example I want to highlight. This is the Dutch government job site. So if you want to get a job at the Dutch government, you go to this site. And everything you do on this site is reported immediately to Google. And every job you click on, if you click on the apply for this job button, they will send a message to Google. And this includes if you go to work for the Dutch intelligence agencies, where I used to work and where I used to be a regulator. And I got terribly upset that everyone that applies for a job there, we report them live to Google Analytics, and we let that happen via the US company Cloudflare. That's worrying. That does not make me happy. And the interesting thing is the Dutch government actually has an open source statistics engine. It's called Matamo. They paid for it already. And actually this website reports all your activities both to the Matamo server and to Google. And this led to parliamentary questions where they said, why are you sending all our job applications to the Secret Service to Google? And the government says, well, we are doing that because it is cheaper. And then we ask, well, how much cheaper is it? Because also it's a bit weird because we already have the open source one. But they said, it's like 10,000 euros. And apparently we prefer spending 10,000 euros on Google over using the open source software that we already have deployed. Maybe at this point, good, I see some questions in the chat. We also have paper elections in Germany, in the Netherlands, but still someone has to add up the numbers. And it happens manually and with the software. So it's an extra check. So don't worry, we do not have computer voting in the Netherlands. But the key thing here is that the Netherlands, generally, we love funding open source and doing all kinds of things with it, but we're not using it in production. And so here's an interesting slide. Like 10 years ago, maybe a bit more, the Netherlands came to the conclusion that we are utterly dependent on Microsoft. And we could have made a choice like 10 years ago to then use something else. That would have been a wise choice, or at least sometimes use something else. But we did not do that. People said, oh, well, what is the problem with this American software? And everyone said, well, the privacy is terrible, and the security is also not good, and we think that it leaks all our data to the US. And then the Dutch National Academic Network called SURF and NREN, and SURF decided that they would make Microsoft safe for Europe. So they started working on the contracts, and they found indeed that the contracts were full of privacy problems already. So they worked with Microsoft to get it good on paper. That was already, they thought it was a very, very good thing to do. And it is of course good because at first, even on paper, it was not good. So if you started using Microsoft products, you would have these contracts that said, and all your data is ours now. And so SURF worked really hard with Microsoft to get it good on paper. And then they went a step further. They also started measuring for Google and for Microsoft, do your workplaces actually keep our data private, or do they leak stuff to the US? And well, you never guess, but they found that all this software leaked tons of data to the US. And that included the file names of documents, or even the whole documents. And for a number of years, there was a company called Privacy Company. It still exists. And they do a lot of interesting tests. And they started measuring the Microsoft and Google solutions and reporting to Microsoft and Google all the information leaks. And they got fixed. And in this way, the Privacy Company and SURF together sort of made Microsoft safe for Europe, or maybe made Europe safe for Microsoft. It's interesting, by the way, that both Microsoft and Google were honestly surprised about how much data they were leaking to the US. And I think they were honestly surprised. But that's not really good news. It just means that they didn't know what they were doing. And after all these problems were solved, they said, okay, it's now safe to use Microsoft. You can now use Microsoft Cloud for like everything, the hospitals, the jails, courts. It's now clean for everyone. But that wasn't enough. On the right, you see this sort of cloud an EU flag and a Dutch flag and this Microsoft arrow. And you will not believe this. This is a website. It's called SLM Microsoft Rijk.nl, which is like the Dutch Microsoft Strategic Vendor Management. And this is actually a sort of, it's not quite clear what it is, but it's part of the Dutch government, and they have made it extremely easy to buy everything from Microsoft. So this is the one-stop shop where within the Dutch government you can buy anything from Microsoft. You just have to fill out the form. There is no procurement, there is no RFP, there is no competition. It has all been taken care of. You can just sign the form, and then you get it. And you should absolutely visit this page because it's rather bizarre. It's not even clear if this is a page by the Dutch government or a page by Microsoft. And it also has some kind of license expiry warning at the bottom right. It's an extremely weird thing. In other countries, they call this the Ministry for Buying Microsoft. And and these people, again, I'm not saying that this is in any way illegal, although I do think it is illegal. But the more important thing is they have made it tremendously easy to buy everything from Microsoft, and conversely, tremendously difficult to buy anything else. So this is a story from a different government department, but I can confirm this from personal experience. If I want to get a virtual machine within the Dutch government that is not from Microsoft, it takes me 160 days of meetings and filling out forms. Whereas if I just give up, then, in the same day, I get the Microsoft server. This is not making it easy to work on digital autonomy, because I have to wait 160 days for one server, and I could get a whole server farm the same afternoon and be completely dependent on the US. But it's not a happy situation. This is, I think, one that other countries should maybe also prepare for. Whenever you try to do something within the Dutch government yourself and not use big tech, you can do all the trials you want. You can do as many trials as you want. But the moment you want to go into production, everyone says, no, you need to be fully compliant with ISO 27001. And you need to be compliant with the accessibility guidelines, and actually there are like 20 things you need to be in compliance with, which means that it's very hard to go live. Now, the interesting thing is, if you are a big tech organization, you can just say, yeah, we're compliant, it's okay, and no one actually checks that. So this is a barrier where people that do not want change say, hey, we need 20 things that we need to be compliant with, and Google assures us they are compliant, but if you're on the inside, they're actually going to check if you're compliant. And there's a very concrete example. The Dutch Parliament has a website, and you can see it on the right, and it's run by Capgemini, and it runs on Azure, and it's fully non-compliant for people that have visual problems. So the blind and people that don't see well have a very hard time using the official Parliament website. However, it's apparently compliant. I also run a Dutch Parliament website called opentk.nl, and it's a lot leaner, and it is used by blind people within the Dutch government because my site actually works for them. But the interesting thing is I could build this parliamentary site outside of Dutch government, because on the outside I don't have to be compliant, and on the inside I would have to be compliant unless I was big tech. We have further regulations coming up, NIS2 and CRA. And I love these regulations. I mean, they're very important regulations, and they will be important. But what is going to happen is that the big tech vendors on which we all depend have a whole department where they will say, yeah, we're fully compliant with this kind of stuff. Don't worry. And anyone trying to do something themselves now has, instead of 20 things to comply with, now 22 things to comply with. So this is a very, this is a barrier. This is a barrier to independence, and actually we're now being strangled with our own regulations. So this is a practical problem. This is the Dutch National Bank, and this is a very telling example. We all know the International Crime Court example by now, but this one may be even more interesting. This is the Dutch Central Bank, and at one point we had a bank here which was sanctioned by the US, and it was not a nice bank. It was a partially Russian bank, And what happened, this bank was sanctioned by the US government, so then the Microsoft services went away. That's how this goes. And then the bank went bankrupt, not because they ran out of money, but simply because they could no longer do business, which is a problem. And then something very interesting happened. When the bank went bankrupt, you have to do these bankruptcy proceedings to get the bookkeeping from the bank, to get the statements. And Microsoft said, now we're not going to give the Dutch court system access to the financial statements of this bank because there are sanctions, which meant that the Dutch court system could not treat this bankruptcy. They could not do anything. And then when they tried to pressure Microsoft actually tried to hide from the Dutch court system. And this was a very a wake-up call to many people in the Dutch court system and in the Dutch government also, to say, well, we are going to have real problems if we have banks that rely on American suppliers, and then these American suppliers do not cooperate with us. So the Dutch central bank said the banks need to prepare for harsh geopolitical conditions. And then, of course, everyone mentioned it already, the sanctions against the International Crime Court. Those, in a way, were a wake-up call. And people said we can no longer go on with this, and we must slow down at least our migrations to the US. But the Netherlands is still not on the right course. So, for example, there is a cloud policy being written, which will say what you can and cannot send to the cloud. And we already have a cloud policy, but everyone is ignoring it. I mean, it's maybe a Dutch thing, but we have a cloud policy which is actually rather good. But then people say it's too difficult to adhere to that policy. So, for example, the policy says you can go to the American cloud, but you also must have a backup plan and an exit plan. And Dutch government people just said, well, no, we're too busy to do that. So we had a report from the other audit board. We have two of them. And they concluded that 2/3 of all Dutch cloud deployments did not have a risk analysis or a backup plan. So not only did they not have a bad one, no, they had no backup plan. Well, so we're now writing a new cloud policy, and maybe we're going to listen to that one. I don't know. But the rumors are that new cloud policy will say that it's fine to move our whole population registry to American clouds, as long as you keep a local backup. But it's still extremely scary. So the situation in the Netherlands is sort of, well, it stopped getting worse maybe, but it is still extremely worrying. So people were like really unhappy about that. And then a year ago or so, no, less than a year ago, I discovered that we've had this situation before. In 1916, we had a colony, Indonesia, and there was a war going on. And in the UK, they were no longer relaying our messages to Indonesia. So the Dutch government got cut off from Indonesia because we were in a fight with the English. And then the Dutch government invested massively, and in today's money, it would have been billions, in building this temple of broadcasting, by which they, with German help, by the way, built a transmitter which could reach Indonesia, and it worked. And that was that resonated with people. They said, how could it be possible that we can no longer have the Dutch Ministry of Finance send a message to the Dutch National Bank without this going through America? Which is, of course, also a ridiculous concept. And then people said, no, we should rebuild this temple of radio, which is in a city called Kootwijk, what's called Radio Kootwijk. And to that day, the town where it's built is actually, the town is called Radio Kootwijk. It was that massive. They named the whole town after it. And then people said, well, maybe we should do a cloud Kootwijk so that we can regain our independent communications facility. This actually got passed as a motion in Dutch parliament, and the Dutch government accepted it, and they said, yes, we need to build a Rijkscloud, and it should allow us to independently communicate with ourselves, and it should be super Dutch. I mean, it should have been super European, but that's how politics works, so they said it must be super Dutch. So they passed this, and the government says, yeah, we're going to do it. But no one, of course, really knows what this means. And but the sentiment is nice, and they've repeated it a few times. They said, yeah, we should at least have something left, that if we get kicked out of the Microsoft cloud, we can still communicate with each other, which is a noble thought. And well, this is a new development, and this is one that happened in Germany already. In Germany, there is the Delos cloud, which is a way in which you can try to make sort of Microsoft GmbH cloud, but you hope that it's sufficiently German that it doesn't fall under US sanctions regulation. In the Netherlands, we have now announced that we are looking into the Thales version, Thales, which is actually the Google Cloud in a box. And this is a new front where people say, well, you can still run on the Google Cloud, but you will now get your own copy of the Google Cloud, which is sort of nice, but it still has the problem that if you are under sanctions, you will no longer get updates on your local copy of the cloud. So then you're still not really sovereign or autonomous or whatever. But this is sort of the new front that has suddenly opened, and this might get our governments to sort of find the halfway solution of being not quite autonomous. But it's something to look out for. And then this is from Deutsche Welle. I probably look more at Deutsche Welle than you do because I'm not in Germany. But they have very good news even on the Netherlands, and our government coalition fell. So we no longer have a coalition, and we no longer have a full functioning government. And that means that until like May or maybe June 2026, nothing is going to happen, nothing real. And that also means for our open source policies, our digital autonomy policies, we should not expect anything to happen. And we can only hope for the best, that sort of the default decisions that get taken in the coming months will not be too bad. So wrapping it up, there is a strong open source ecosystem here, and the government also talks a lot about it, and it is lots of talking shops. We have OSPOS and everything. We have DigiLab, Haven, and the enthusiasm is there, but we never use this, or almost never use this in production. And then we come back to this thesis I had, that most of the people that make these decisions, they don't like technology, so they want to make the most safe choices from a career perspective. And right now, the safe choice is always picking big tech, because everyone's picking big tech, and how could you be wrong doing that? And they're not going to risk their career to make interesting strategic choices. So we do have our election software that is super open source, which is nice. So it's not that we have laws against it. Actually, we have laws that say that we must do open source. It's just that, and this is a very key point, when it comes to running production systems, desktop systems, these people do not look at the government policies. These are just executing departments, and they want to execute the safe thing. Our local governments have now completely given up, so it's impossible to get a new passport without Microsoft and the Americans knowing about it. All the local cities are 100% on the Microsoft cloud. We barely prevented the central government from doing that, and they might still do it if we're not paying attention. Trump, the Amsterdam Trade Bank helped, and we're now exploring this sort of US cloud in your own sovereign box. Not sure if that's a good idea. And until May 2026, probably it's unclear what will happen, and it's all not that great. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I see there are some questions, maybe.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting view. What are your recommendations for us, for Europe, for the Europeans?
Yeah, I do have some recommendations, and the main thing, the most visible problem right now is Microsoft 365, which is in Switzerland a very active discussion in all countries. Mm-hmm. It is also the most difficult problem to solve. And I saw discussion in the chat on the Munich situation already. Employees in offices will not accept anything other than the real Microsoft. Schleswig-Holstein is working on it, and they have a 5-year project, I think, on educating everyone. But replacing Microsoft 365 is like the most difficult thing you can do right now. It's also super important, but it's also super difficult. One thing that is a lot easier to do is the back-end systems. So if you have a tax agency, or if you have a hospital, or a healthcare system, or state insurance, you can make sure that their back-end is not on US clouds. Because then you only have to convince the developers. It's not that easy to convince developers already, an architect, but at least you do not have to convince millions of government workers to change their thing. So one recommendation I would have is to not only focus on the most visible bit, being Microsoft 365, but also hunt for the dependencies in the back end, for which Europe is much better suited to provide alternatives.
Yeah, thank you. There's just a question because of the link, Reich Microsoft Strategic Vendor Management. Can you put the link in the chat, please? Is it possible?
Yeah, I could. I hope I got it right.
It's fine. I think we only one question because we run out of time. Yeah, that's the Microsoft. Okay, thank you. And yeah, one question. Matthias? Maximilian Kroker. Yeah, please. Maximilian. Bitte entmuten und Frage stellen. Dann geht's am besten.
Apologies for a late reply. It's always difficult to get the microphone activated in big blue button. Just a quick question. You mentioned the Dutch elections and it used German software. Can you name the German software?
Yeah, I can. It's not a secret at all. I think they're called Elect, actually. It's a very boring name. And there were two companies and they merged and they're sort of halfway owned by the German government. And it has actually been it's 1 million lines of Java to run your elections. And you can actually download it from the Dutch electoral website, and it's really fun to read. And it's also extremely German. So it's written in Java, the code is in German, and it has variable names of 80 characters. And it's sort of very funny for us. It's great software. It's just that eventually we prefer to have our own fully open source software. Elect it might be called Elect IT.